Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll learn Masechtas Chulin daf Nun Zayin. We're going to begin on the second line from the top. Nishtabru ragleha. So our Mishnah told us that when it comes to certain things of a bird, even though they seem problematic, nonetheless they're kosher. And the examples that the Mishnah gave was, as we're going to first see, that Nishdabru gapeha, if its wing broke, Nishdabru ragleha, its foot was broken, and then Nimratu kenafeha, if its feathers were plucked. Rabbi Yehuda says, Im natul hanaitza psula. However, the down feathers, then it's puzzle, as you can see in this picture over here on the bottom. So the naitza, as it says here, is these bushy feathers provide the bird with insulation against the cold. So those feathers being removed are more significant, and therefore that could be problematic. Okay, so let's begin the Mishnah. So, as we said, if there's something wrong that the leg is broken on a bird, so then it's still kosher. Nishtabu ragleha. Sahu sana, Rashi says that's a sal. There was a basket, din kuri, that kind of got smashed, and because of that, Rashi says there was oifais shishtabu raglehen biarkuv mata. There were some birds apparently in this basket, and we needed to find out what the status of them because they were damaged, that their feet were broken. The question is, does that make it kosher or not? Okay, and Rashi says also the Shuvas Goinim that it's oiv shacharhu v'shalmayimhu. Okay, so let's look at the Gemara. So these birds, the Asoli came to Rabbi, and Bad Ke Rabbi started examining these birds, but Sumas Hagidin v'achsherei. Now again, the Mishnah says that even if there's a broken leg, it's kosher, but he examined to check the sinews. And Rashi says there's actually shisha chutin kayomin, to see that there's like 16 of these sinews that are still kayim, and that they would therefore be able to live. So basically, you could have a broken leg, this bird, but if also there's internal damage in the leg, which includes the destruction of its gidin, then apparently that would make it more problematic. If you have a dislocation in the hand, which means like the foreleg of the animal, it's still kosher. Even though it's dislocated, it will still doesn't mean that the animal is going to die. Shmutas yadcha b'behema treifa. This is in the parentheses. If there's a dislocation of the thigh bone of the animal, that's more problematic. So when it comes to an animal, if it's the hand, then it's still kosher, but the thigh bone, which we can understand that being much more significant damage, so that dislocation will render the animal treifa. And then the Gemara continues. Shmutas yadcha ba'oif treifa, shmutas gaf ba'oif treifa. So when it comes to the thigh bone, shmutas yarech ba'of treifa, that when it comes to the dislocation of the thigh bone of a bird, also it will be a treifa. In other words, just like the parentheses, we don't make a distinction, assuming that we're supposed to read the parentheses, that there's no distinction in an animal and a bird regarding to its thigh that's dislocated. That makes it a treifa. Shmutas gaf ba'oif tarfa. If there's a dislocation of the wing of a bird, that's treifa, which is a little bit hard to understand because our Mishnah said that nishtabru gapeha, if the wing is broken, it's still kosher. But there's obviously, according to this, a distinction between a dislocation, shmutas gaf, and the shmiras gaf, the breaking of it. And Rashi says this is perak elyon, the upper joint, which is attached to the wing, is a treifa. Why, says the Gemara, Chayshinan, Shema Nikva Hareya, that may actually cause damage in the in the lung. So it doesn't mean that in itself is a problem, that makes it a treifa, but that damage will affect the lung, says Rashi. Lafi shahareya nichbos ben hatzulois, because the ribs are concealed between the ribs. V'krum habasar rach, and the membrane of the flesh is soft, v'dak, and thin, ben cell cell between each rib. And therefore, v'kishmoitesas gapa, when you would end up dislocating the wing, what happens is hamis nekes hareya im hagaf. You'll end up also basically puncturing and ruining the lung together with the wing. So that is the issue. If we're dealing with a bird, birds are kind of small, as we last checked. So if you did damage to its wing, that it was dislocated, that will also affect its ribs, which then itself obviously makes it treifa. Shmuel Omer tibadik. No, examine it. Examine the lung, says Rashi. How do you do that? So Rashi says, machnis kana dak. Take a thin reed, which is hollow like a straw, big gargaris in the windpipe, v'noifach bareya, and blow up the lung. V'im haruach yoitze treifa v'yamam sheru. You can see if there's any escaping air. If there's escaping air, that's obviously proof that there's a hole in the lung, making it a treifa. However, if you blow it and it remains blown without any air escape, then it's kosher. So that's what you can do. Just examine it. V'chein Rav Nachman, Rav Yochanan tibadik. Chizkim in reya l'oif. So you can't do that because birds don't have lungs. So Gemara obviously is not going to accept that because birds breathe and you need lungs to breathe. So obviously that's not what Chizki is referring to. So we'll have to understand what he means by that. Rav Yochanan yeshlo, certainly they do have lungs. V'yeshaneh ka'ol shel vered, and it has the appearance just like the petal, like a rose petal. So they are bein agafayim, between the wings. So because again the lungs are so close to the wings, with a dislocation of a bird's wings, that could be problems with the ribs, with the lung as well. So my ein reil oif. What did Chizkiah mean? Klal doesn't mean that they don't have a lung. We know they do, so you can't say that birds don't have lungs. El Doloi mitraf bay. It just means that we're not as concerned about the lungs becoming treif when it comes to a bird as opposed to an animal. We'll see why. Vatani Levi Truvas Shemon Chachamim Bebehema Keneged Ba'oif. So just 1 second. How could you say that? We know that if you study an animal and the Yudches Treifas by an animal, we say the same thing as by a bird. So we know, of course, when it comes to an animal, that the main thing that we're mostly concerned of is regarding holes in the lungs, sirchas and all that, which we've discussed at great length. So how could you tell me that a bird can't become treif from something wrong with its lung? Of course it should. Yes, we did mention that on some level birds are more strict, that if in the event that you have a broken bone, even though there's no hole in the membrane of the brain, nonetheless, because it's so thin, so we're more concerned when it comes to that. Ella, what does it mean it doesn't have lungs? Or of course they do have lungs, and what does it mean that they are not able to become treif? They could become treif. It means ein loy lo linpoil v'loy l'chamer. It means that we don't have to be concerned of it, not when the bird would fall off a very high place. We'll see Rashi. So, and also not regarding to fire. So, what does that mean? Says Rashi, im nafal min agag, if a bird falls from a roof, the amr sricha bedika in sarach livdech bareya. You don't have to check the lungs. As well, but nafal, or if let's say it fell into fire, shaboidkin hamayim, that we check the innards, shema harikoi in sarach bedika livdech kareya. So we check the internal organs which are naturally red, like the heart, the lungs, So if they turn green, then that becomes problematic. We don't have to do that examination when it comes to a bird. My time, because the majority of the ribs are actually are a form of protection. So where it says Abaha Midyam Rabbi Yochanan the Avishna Ka'il Shel Vered Ben Gafayim, that it looks like these rose petals by the wings. It sounds like he holds there's no lungs at all. El Amri Ben Merava Mishmei Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Chanina B'Davarav Shel Beribi Nicker Shein Baki B'Tarnagoyim. It's clear that you're not an expert when it comes to the dinim of Tarnagoyim, right? To be able to say such a statement, obviously you're not a baki. Okay, says Rashi, Einu ragul echel tarnagoyim. You obviously don't eat them. He's like really saying, like almost in jest, because obviously we all know that there actually are ribs. So a bird's ribs have more space between each rib, so when it falls, it won't damage it as a behemoth with ribs which are closer together. So again, a bird's let's look at this Rashi. So a bird's ribs lies on their edge toward the body cavity, resulting in more space between the ribs. The ribs are closer, so it could damage more easily when it would fall or in fire. So that is the basic answer for that. Question 7. Al eza pigam ba'oif nechlu bo im havi treifa olo v'yemer al zeb gemara nahar nar pashte. Let's just do a little bit further. Amrule Rabba. Okay, fine. Amarav Huna Amarav Shmutis Yerech Ba'oiv Kshera. If you have the dislocation of the thigh of the bird, then a taka is kosher. Now we said above that Shmutis Yerech in a bird is trefa. So here we have this machlokas. Amali Rabba Bar Rav Huna B'Ha Rabbana De'asam Pomadisa Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmei Derav Amar Shmutis Yerech Ba'oiv trefa. We said above. Over here, that's trefa, so how can you say it's kosher? So apparently there's a machlokas, and this is why I didn't want to do question 7 yet. Armale bari nahara, rivers, upashte, and it flows. So what exactly is this interesting language? Says Rashi, Ein pshite hanahar daimin zeh charev zeh oimid. You can't compare one river. Sometimes part of the river, it's very rapid, right? You have some rapid waters, and sometimes it's very smooth. Kach ein minhag mekaymas daimais. Different places have different customs. Rav kashra. Why did Rav say it was kosher? Svirule v'Rav b'nei pomadisa shenahagabo iser, and they are strict, and they say it's trefa. V'hetir b'fneihem v'Rav Yehuda b'pomadisa who was summoned to Rav tarfa svirule. Okay, so basically there's different locations and different customs, etc., and that's the reason why one person can say it's treif, the other one could say it is it's kosher. So that's the idea behind that. Let's look at a couple of pictures. We have some good pictures over here, a lot of them actually. So we'll try to be a little bit selective. First of all, we have the shmutas gaf, the dislocation of a wing. And you can see over here in this picture, at least according to Shitas Rashi, where this wing is located. All right, I mean, we know where the wing is, but we're talking about specifically dislocation. And it says, according to Rashi, a dislocated wing requires that the nearby lungs be checked for punctures. According to other Rishonim, this is true only when the scapula, which is the gaf, which is the wing, is dislocated. The membrane that normally connects the ribs has been removed to expose the lungs. Okay. Okay. We have another picture over here, which we're going to see the top of a chicken with the skin, muscle, and membrane removed to expose the ribs and the lungs behind them. And the wing is also removed, so it's a little bit graphic, but again, for us to be able to get a better understanding of what this Gemara is talking about. So that's what that's referring to. And let's take one more picture. The lungs of a chicken viewed from the body cavity. Unlike the ribs of an animal which project their width parallel to the body, the ribs of a bird project into the body cavity. And we'll also see the lungs and kidneys of a chicken. The lungs are partially pulled out, showing how they're sandwiched in the ribs. So here's just a few more pictures. Again, a little bit graphic, but again, for us to have a better understanding of what we're talking about, that's basically what we're dealing with here. Okay. All right, and that's probably going to be for the most part, everything that we're going to be seeing as far as pictures are concerned. Well, there's actually another less graphic picture where you can see the innards of this animal in this black and white picture, where we can see where the lungs are and where they are in proximity to the wings, which of course are quite close by, and that's the reason why it's questionable what the din is. It says over here, Rashi interprets the gaf as a wing. When a wing is dislocated, we're concerned that perhaps the nearby lungs were punctured as well. This is because the wings are located immediately adjacent to the rib cage, and the lungs of a bird are tightly compressed in the rib cage. So that is, and there's a whole shtick tire over here about doing bedikas on the lungs of a bird. A very complex piece, so we're not going to really spend 15 minutes reading a whole synopsis, almost like an essay, but we'll just continue with question 7. Al eza pagam ba'of. So what pagam with a bird? Is there a machlokus if it's a treif or not? And on that we said nahar pashta. So that is, the answer is shmuta, the shmutas yerech ba'oif. If the thigh bone was dislocated on a bird, so that's where we find the machlokas. TA 25 l'inima be'inan l'meimar ein reya l'of umadua. So how can we say that there's no lungs? Of course there are. It just means lo lin poil, that if it fell, you don't have to do a bedika because it fell, or the lechamer, which means that if it fell into a fire, we don't have to examine to see if there's discoloration of green. And as he says here, because the ribs of a bird protect it, as opposed to an animal, which is the same question as TB 28. They do that sometimes. What exactly did I write? Hopefully the right answer. Okay, it's good. I wrote a bunch of stuff in English. The ribs of a bird are more far apart, so when the bird falls, it allows more space between the ribs for the insides not to be damaged. Mashen Kane by a behemoth where the ribs are closer together. Okay. I'm usually not so thrilled when I write so much English, but I guess they can't mark that wrong. All right, let's keep on moving. So that taka is the machlokas. Also, Rabbi Yomi Barabba the kabadik b'tzoymes agidin. So he had those broken leg, and he was examining the sinews inside. What are you doing that for? Right? If the thigh bone was damaged, so it's kosher anyway. So what are you doing that you're worried not about necessarily a broken leg, but even if it's true that there's a dislocation of the thigh, it's still going to be kosher. So why are you spending all this time doing this significant examination? What's the whole purpose of it? Right? It says Rashi Bahari Hakol Nitol Kakoshkin in Nitol Tsumas Agin and Lavadan. So what's the problem? Sharmalei Anam Mastisi Adan. I know the Mastisa, we'll see later on, Daf Ayin Vav, the Behema Shenechtechu Ragleha, if you have the animal which is cut off, Min Harkuval Mata, from the knee down, Shera. Min Harkuval Mal Psula, from above it's puzzle. And here's the line which I remember. The Chain Shenitul Tsumas Agidin. So too, if there's severed sinews, that will also be a problem. The same thing if there's nitel tsumas agin and it's treifa. So I need to examine, maybe not because of the dislocation of the erech, because of the thigh, but perhaps because of what it says over here, that if the sinews are severed, then it becomes treifa. So that's why I'm checking. Yohalchi kasha derav derav. So if that's the case, it's a stira. So ishtik. Amalei dilma shanle ben shmuta l'chatucha. Maybe there's a difference between when he says it's kosher and it's treifa. Maybe the distinction is between when it's dislocated and when it is broken. So Amalei v'yad mafart shemaisa de Rav. You were explaining the sugi of Rav, the Ferishim Rav. He actually said exactly what you said, that shmuta kosher. If it's dislocated, taka it's kosher. Chatucha psula. However, once it's cut, that becomes problematic. So you say, well, what's the difference? Yalta Tam, don't ask questions about treifas. Shahari chayitcha mekan v'mesa v'chat mekan v'chayisa. We know that this is just how the animal works in practicality. One cut over here, it can live. You make a cut even higher up, it potentially could die. Make a cut lower, it could die. So the reality is that you can't lure it out from one part of the animal to the next, because animals can live and die just by certain parts of the body being cut. So again, this is the whole dispute of this daf, whether or not the dislocation of the thigh bone is treifa on a bird. Basically, I swear to you, from the day in which Mar went over to there, as we continue to Nun Zayin Bebeis, Havale Pislin Pek Kamei de Rabhuna. He had a statement against the Shita Rabhuna. Because he said that it's not kosher. So Ashkache Nalmi Rab Yirmiyah, we found him, Rav Yirmiyah Barabba, Yosef Kabadik B'Tzumas Agidin, and he was examining the sinews to see if they were severed. We asked him, so what are you doing? Why do you have to check it more? Even if the thigh bone itself is dislocated, it's kosher. So as we saw before. If you have an animal who was cut, its foot, from the knee down, it's kosher minar kuval psul. And here's the key line: right? As we said, that if the tzumas aginin are severed, then it becomes treifa. Right? So that's the reason why you need to examine the sinews. The Amrila Ihachi Kash Rav Rav. So we said it's a steer. So Ishnik V'Akshila V'Dilma Shanuli Rabin Shmuta Chatucha. Even the one time he says it's kosher, one time he says it's treifa. Maybe there's a distinction between dislocation and cut. Yermali V'Yad Mefarsha Shmaita the Rabbi Ferishim Rav Shmuta Kasher Chatucha Psula. You're right. That's exactly the case. If it's dislocated, Taki, you're right. Then the din is that it's going to be kosher. However, it's cut, it's possible. V'Yad Mad Biyadcha. So you, what's in your hands? You saying it's treif. So we say that again it's a machlokus, but not everyone holds it's a treifa, but I do. Yom Rav Yaakov bar Idi il mole habi Rav Yochanan ba'atre. If it would have been that Rav Yochanan would have been in our city, the Ayriba, that he would paskin Chavruta lahatera, chaverta lahatera, then perhaps we would be able to find a het. And Rabbi Yochanan himself we just quoted whole Shmutas Yerech Bof as Treifa. So lo parchis, we would not have flinched. Rabbi Shmutas Yerech Boif Kshera. The Tarnagoylis Haisalo Rav Chanina Shnishma Yerech Shula. There was this case of Rav Chanina in which the thigh bone was dislocated. Vavilafni Rabbi Vatiroloi, and Taki he matered it. Umolcha Rav Chanina, and Rav Chanina like salted it. Basically, he agrees to it. It says Rashi Kedelis Skayim. Basically, not only did he say nothing, he actually did something to basically demonstrate that it should be preserved. As Rashi says, Liras Yamim Rabim, Vahavi Mayir Halacha Talmidim, and they paskin this to the students. Zeh Hitterli Rebbe, Zeh Hitterli Rebbe, Elokiha. The truth is, after all is said and done, where we say, the dislocation of the thigh bone on a bird is kosher, we don't hold like any of that, except for the following. The Shom Yosef ben Nehoroi asked Rabbi Shimon Levi that the following question was posed: Kediras kana, if you have a kana, the trachea, in which there is a cut, and it's a significant cut, Rashi says, rachba, its width, similar to like a Kediras kana kamin aruba, almost like it was cut so deeply, comparable to like that of like a skylight. Bekama, how much will it be that it becomes treifa? Armelo Mishnah Shlema Shaninu. What do you mean? We know this. It's a Mishnah. It says on Isser Hayitalki. It says the amount of a Italian Isser coin when it comes to the trachea, to the windpipe. So there was this sheep in our neighborhood, Shin Nikdar Kana Shala, that again it was cut up, its windpipe. And we put this plug into it, this type of reed, and it was able to survive. So what do you mean that's, even if has this hole this size, that's going to die? It's not going to die. May it not be that this halacha should be widespread among Yisrael. Shmutas Yorech Ba'o Treifa. That again, it's a treifa. V'tarnagos ha'yisrael Reb Shimon ben Chalafta, and there was a tarnagolos she nishmata yadcha yoreach shula, that again the thigh bone was dislocated. V'yasala sheferish shilkana, and he made some type of a cast out of reed, so that the leg of this and the thigh bone should be healed. Like he was wheeling and doing like physical therapy for this chicken. And it lived. In other words, this bird that, even though it was taken care of greatly by Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, which is a very noble thing to take care of this animal, it didn't live. It probably died within 12 months. So, and therefore, your case also of this case where the kana was severely cut, more than that of an Isser Hitalki. So even though there's something you can do to somehow protect it and to bandage it up, it's still going to die within 12 months. So it's still a treifa. Amr Allah al Shimon ben Chalafta, she'oskin b'dvarim haya, that he was someone again who was Isaac in these types of matters, which seems to be a pretty interesting way to dedicate his time in a nice way. He did this basically in order to be able to go against people who spoke regarding Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda said in our Mishnah that if you pluck out the down feathers which protect the bird from the cold and the harsh elements, then it becomes possible because it's a treifa. It can't live. It goes Shimon ben Chalafta, someone actually took out its feathers, and he put it by an oven, and he wrapped up this chicken with the cloth from a coppersmith, and new feathers grew even bigger than the ones that were there before. So this was perhaps a way to demonstrate that Rabbi Yehuda's psak is incorrect, right? That these down feathers does not necessarily render it a treifa. If you do proper physical therapy and care for this chicken, it'll live. Our answer is V'dilmak Savar Yehuda Tarfam Mishbachas. So maybe what he actually holds is that a treifa mashbachas, will it get better? So whether to determine whether something is a treifa or not may not necessarily mean something in which will immediately die or die within 12 months. Maybe it's referring to that will it get better? So what do we see? The thing which makes it a treifa, apparently we said that it can't get better, but according to his interpretation, he saw that the feathers got better, they got bigger, right? So that's the whole question. Is it also that the feathers that were removed, if you would do nothing, it would die, or through these extra measures, so maybe that's what caused it to live? So my askim devarim. So what exactly are these experiments? Why is he doing that? So Amar Mishar Shedichsiv Leich Al Nimla Atzel. Go and look at a ant to determine its ability to constantly be working and not be lazy. Ra darcheha v'chacham. Go and look at its ways and become wise. Asher ein lo kitzim shaiter. We do not find among these different creatures one that rules. Umoishel tovin bikayitz, and the ruler that prepares in the summer lachmet's bread. Omer Izel Ixi Ivadai Hu. Let me go and see if it's true. Dolesahu Malka, that an ant has no leader, an ant has no king. Ozil B'tekufas Tammuz. So we went in the middle of the summer. Parsi Leglime Kinish Deshumshani, and he covered up an anthill which had mustard seeds. Nothing. He went out. Also Chaiminahu. One of them went out. Asnach be simana, and it kind of simna. It went out. Oh, so the shumshumani is nemolim, rather. I'm sorry, it's not mustard seeds. It's referring to that there was a whole hill of ants. Nafik minayu, says Rashi, Matei Chayri. One of the ants left its hill, and it went and it saw that there was shade because of the that he covered it up. So Rashi says, Asnach be simona, he made a sign lahakira to know Leda ma yasalo chaverav kishiyimsa shakran, that what will his friends do when they see this lie. So Omer lahu nafal tula nafku. We also dalil glima nafal shimsha. So he ended up lifting up this garment, and all of a sudden the sun started shining. So nafal avakatle. So he ended up killing this ant. It killed the ant, basically because he said, "Oh, it's dark outside," and then another ant came, and they saw it was sunny, so the ant was killed. Obviously, there's no king. The islahu harmana the malka. if there was some type of ruling over a king, luli boy, you would not have asked permission to kill the ant. Says Rashi, Meis Hamelech. Okay, fine. Armule Ravacha Beredu Rebel Ravashi Vidilma Malkahavi Bahadayu. Maybe there was actually a king ant that was there, and they actually consulted the ant and that king. Inami Harmana de Malkahavi Nikiti. Look at this, Rashi. Shekol Hatel Bechavero Yihargehu. Anyone who is like greater than the friend can kill the other one. Inami bein Malka de Malkahavi. Says Rashi, Mesa Melech. Maybe ants do have kings, but that king ant died. Yadain will come acher, and maybe they just didn't appoint the new king ant yet. V'derech eretz lasais ish hayash be'enav, and everyone basically has to do what they think is proper at that time. K'nesiv b'yomim mahim ish asher be'enav yasa. So this is not necessarily a proof whether ants have kings, right, ruling them. So dechsiv b'yomim mahim in melech v'Yisrael ish hayash be'enav yasa. Elo soymech ahim nusa d'shlomo. What does that mean? Neman hu al kach, he's believed Ruach HaKodesh Amra, and he has Ruach HaKodesh. So therefore, we know there's like all these working ants, and there's the queen ant, right? So there's no king ant, and this was proof, even though you can ask kashas on him, but he has Ruach HaKodesh, so believe the guy. Amr Rav Huna Simon L'Treif Yud Beis Chodesh. If you want to know, and this is going to be question 8, Elu Simonim Nostu Kama Tanoim Kedileda Sheim Kach Biyadua Shein Treifa. So how will you know that an animal's not a treifa? So one answer, Pashit, one which most people know, is that if it lives for 12 months. So if you're not sure, let the animal live for 12 months, and if the animal lived for 12 months, you know then it wasn't a treifa. Meisvei similar treifa koshin yoledes. Another answer is if it's not able to give birth, which means if an animal can give birth right away, so then you know it's not a treifa. That if its health improves, then you know it's kosher. However, if it keeps deteriorating, getting worse, so that's another answer. Rabbi Omer similar treifa shloshim yoyim. So it's actually those are the 4 answers. Yoledes mishpachas v'yoleches, if it can live for 30 days, or if it lives for 12 months. Harbe miskayamo shneim shaloshanim. We know that a lot of animals could live for 2 years, even 3 years, even though for sure it's a treifa. So surviving a year doesn't seem to be approved. So our answer is tenoihi, desanya. If it go goyles, when it comes to the skull, we say ad sheish bo nekev echad. It has a whole oyrich which is long. A feel nikavim harbe mitzdarfim lemoli makdeach, which is a machlok speisham is hillel. That once it has the hole of the size of a drill, even if it's mistarif, as Rashi reminds us, it no longer can be matamatumas oihil. Now, this is of course a machlok speisham is hillel, but according to this shita, we say it's mitzdarif to the size of a hole, and it's no longer considered to be a skull, an entire skull, which will be matam oil. So that's what that is. Rav Yosi ben Hamashulim Maisa ba'inbul be'echad she nivchasa gilgalta of Yoso loi chiduk shel kuria. They took this gourd, says Rashi chaticha shel delastivesha, a dry piece of gourd, b'chaya, and they basically stuck it into that spot, and it lived. So it's almost like some type of a brain surgery, or they patched it up. Omer Rav Shimon Eliezer mishum raya yomos hachama haya was in the summer. Kivon she'omer leha yomos hatzana miyad meis. So the whole point of an animal to survive is not just 12 months, it's being able to survive all the elements. So even though it survived in the summer, but to have a hole in the skull even though it was patched up by some dry gourd, that wasn't enough for it to be able to live through the harsh winter. So the halacha is that if it could still if it could give birth, and also that it gets better, so then that will be proof that the animal is no longer treifa ad kan.